Sorry. Another wonderful rural woman leader, Mum Lydia Compe, who died 2 years ago today. So this is a story of a South African community which intertwines women. Firstly, Cynthia Jansen, Candice Jansen, Cynthia Mavuso, myself, and Nomhlangano Beauty Mkhize. As you can see, Candice remarks, the collective works of photographers Cynthia Mavuso and Gille Vlieg about Driefontein during the 1980s helps us remember the intimate community of Driefontein and its resistance histories. This presentation introduces what I am imagining as photographers' potential to address South Africa's ongoing need for collective, cultural, and archival approaches to social work and heritage education. 1982 was a turning point in my life. I was 42, known as Gille Vlieg, a mother, a wife, a South African champion yacht sailor, a virtually non-political white woman, apparently protected by the South African apartheid government, and I was emotionally stuck. The other image shows the woman, the image on the left shows the woman I thought I ought to be. However, something inside of me called out for more involvement with my country, and I knew I needed to let the apartheid government know they were not acting in my name. I wanted to join an organization which stood out against apartheid's fascist way of being, and I remembered seeing women wearing black sashes who held placards protesting apartheid actions, standing alone along a main road into Johannesburg. So I became a Black Sash member. The Black Sash was formed in 1955, so 70 years old this year, and it rapidly became an effective organization against apartheid. It ran advice offices in various cities and had a volunteer component. The members of SASH were white, middle-class women who used their whiteness to protest against apartheid's legislation and actions. Black Sash in Johannesburg started another organization called the Transvaal Rural Action Committee, TRAC, so that it could employ field workers to support and assist rural communities being forcibly removed from the land they owned. The Johannesburg Black Sash had volunteers who supported TRAC. Driefontein, which is 430 kilometers from Johannesburg, lying close to the Swaziland, now Eswatini border, was one of those communities we worked with. It would take us about 3.5 hours to drive there. I first came to Driefontein in January 1983 as part of this Black Sash group who wanted to support and contribute to Driefontein's fight against being removed from their land. I saw myself as a tentative photographer then. However, in February 1984, I was invited to join Afropix, the photographic collective in South Africa. Why would this community be under threat of removal from land that they had title deed to? In 1913, while South Africa was under the rule of the British Empire, the Native Land Act divided South Africa into 87% for white people and 13% for black people. After 1948, when apartheid became legalized, the 13% was fragmented into so-called homelands for black people. Black people had been encouraged to form syndicates and buy land together, giving them title deeds. Pixley Kasemi, a founder of the ANC, established the South African Native Farmers Association, which bought the Driefontein farm and divided it amongst landowners. For some people, this meant living on bread and water to save enough money to be able to buy the land. Mrs. Shongwe, a child then, remembered doing exactly this. Petrus Nkosi said, "The land is our whole lives." The people of Driefontein grew their own food. They had fields for cattle. Many springs in the area provided water. Their lives were stable but simple. The apartheid government had provided primary schools and teachers. In 1965, the apartheid government ordered Driefontein residents to move to various homelands. Their landowners refused. In 1983, the apartheid government again ordered them to move. Again, the landowners refused and carried on with their lives. However, the apartheid officials ignored their refusal and painted numbers on the doors of residents which indicated their imminent removal. This is Beauty Mkhize's husband's ancestral home with its door numbered. One of the ways that the apartheid government forced people to move was to stop pension and grant payouts in Driefontein, telling that once they had moved to the new area, they would get their pensions again. This is part of the queue in Driefontein to get pensions. Black Sash member Josie Adler and Nomhlangana Beauty and Keith take statements from the people of Driefontein in an attempt to protest the pension payout restrictions. The leader of the resistance, Saul Keys, who was Beauty's husband, held community meetings to update residents about developments in the proposed removal. Here they are listening to a white magistrate from a town nearby announcing that the removal would take place. Community meetings were held in school grounds. Then on the 2nd of April 1983, while holding a community meeting at the school where Cynthia Mavuso talked, Saul Keys was shot and killed by a white policeman. The community was devastated. Press and other activists came from Johannesburg and other areas to attend his funeral. Just 2 months later, Nomhlangano Beauty Mkhize took over her husband's position as leader of the resistance against the removal. 9 months later, the white policeman who had killed Saul Mkhize was acquitted of his murder. The community had not only lost their legal battle, but also began to lose their faith in justice. Moreover, they still might lose their land. People slowly recovered, and in May 1984, community meetings were held again, this time close to the Mkhize homestead. Here, track field worker Ninka Claessens brought human rights lawyer Peter Harris to listen to the community's opinions and requests. Driefontein leaders like Victor Mangeli, who is semi-blind, makes it clear he refuses to leave his land. Hilda Gumedi, a long-time property owner, added her opinion. In spite of Driefontein being a patriarchal community, the women were as vocal as the men about their refusal to leave. By October 1984, Nomhlangano Beauty Mkhize, now out of mourning, continued to lead the resistance. Driefontein had long needed a clinic, and with the help financial help of many supportive organizations, in September 1985, they celebrated the opening of a clinic. This was in defiance of the apartheid government's ongoing determination for them to be moved. Prayers began this significant celebration. Nomhlangano placed tribute to TRAC's fieldworker and Inca classes for all TRAC's support. Activists, diplomats, and other dignitaries from elsewhere were invited. Ines Mavuso, holding the microphone on the right, and also as in the insert, the leader of one of the homelands Driefontein people were to be moved into, despite being paid and given his position by the apartheid government, bravely announced his refusal to receive them. This decision gave pause to the apartheid government's removals plan. His refusal created great joy. Then, in 1990, the ANC and other anti-apartheid organizations were unbanned, and the threat of removal is finally lifted. One of the offshoots of Driefontein's resistance was that women had grown immensely strong during the struggle. Life settled into a slower, reimagined place. The tension begins to lift. Then Catherine Kennedy from the South African History Archive says, we decided to go to Driefontein in September 2013, exactly 100 years after the infamous Land Act, to take a portable exhibition of my images and some other documents to Driefontein and other areas. Marge Brown is a former track field worker and in 2028 was voted one of the top 10 teachers, gave workshops on the 1913 Land Act to high school learners who had studied history. We use copies of my historical 1980s photographs as well as track materials from the 1980s, Catherine says, and hung them on washing lines, which were part of the kits. This informal participatory exhibition's form and approach also enabled intergenerational exchange with young community members, allowing us to scan some of their own photographs and artifacts so as to expand, deepen, and personalize the archive around these underrepresented community histories. In September 2013, I took this particular image of women looking at the exhibition images. However, only earlier this year did I discover that two of the women in this image are Cynthia Mavuso and her daughter. So Cynthia and I had already met, but unwittingly. Cynthia was born in Driefontein and grew up in Driefontein. She taught isiZulu at Golani Primary School until she retired in June 2019. In this October 2021 article, her daughter Tule speaks about her admiration for her mother's photography with Sabelo Mlangeni, who was also born in Driefontein, and who Cynthia encouraged to take up photography and is now internationally recognized. These are some of Cynthia's images. Cynthia was part of the fabric and heartbeat of the Driefontein community, and her photography recorded and commemorated the ordinary and special occasions of life around her. It was unusual for Black women to be interested in taking images. Cynthia's father, Nathaniel Gladler, was a photographer, and this had sparked her interest, which became her passion. Even as she took her images, she would encourage others to take up photography. This gave it the status of umthwebuli, an isiZulu word about which Dr. Koleka Shange, a lecturer at the anthropology department of the University of Witwatersrand, says, Mavuso's practice of umthwebuli is one that is transformative, as it helps in encouraging generations to come. It keeps in mind generations to come. Mavuso is not only umthwebuli who is preoccupied with making her own body of work, but she passes down what is referred to as an aesthetic inheritance to many, including photographers such as Sabelo Mlangeni. This is to say that under the tutelage of Cynthia Mavuso, other photographers such as Mlangeni are born, which is quite significant in isiZulu culture because the passing down from one generation to another is seen as highly valuable. Santa Mafokeng, my friend and Afropix colleague, felt that he was less interested in the unrest of apartheid times than in the ordinary life in the township. And this could be said of Cynthia's photographic work too. For both Cynthia and I, photography mattered in recording events, people, and places. She archives her work in photographic albums as well as the scans shown here. She says, our images will play a major role in Driefontein's history. The future generations will not only hear stories about what happened, but they will also get to see visuals of actual events. This will make it easier for authors to write about the history of Driefontein. Hopefully, our joint photographic work will survive into the future, becoming archival remembrances of daily life under difficult circumstances, along with family, school, and community celebrations that lift the spirit. It is said, the more we are governed by idiots and have no control over our destinies, the more we need to tell stories about who we are, why we are, where we come from, and what might be possible. Thank you.